Hello everyone, welcome to N.O.S. Today we will be discussing about one of the most important human systems among the human beings, and that is the respiratory system. In this figure we can see that the respiratory system actually comprises of an airway tract and two lungs. Through this process we respire every day. So we have seen that we continuously breathe throughout the day and all our lives. It is the most important mechanism in order to provide the oxygen that is necessary for the metabolic actions within the cells and tissues of our body so that they can work effectively. So, what are the different structures that are involved in the respiratory system actually are? They are actually categorized into upper respiratory tract and lower respiratory tract. So, based on this system, we can see that in the upper respiratory tract there are four structures. This is nose, nasal cavity, sinuses, and pharynx. So, nose is one of the most external entrance through which the air enters inside our respiratory system. It is lined with coarse hairs which helps to trap any kind of large molecules or particles from entering into our lungs. Likewise, it is actually divided into external and internal portions and supported with the help of the bones and the cartilage. It has a large cavity within the skull which helps to connect the external nose with the internal nose. So this is about the nose, which is one of the most external parts of the respiratory tract. Likewise, the next part is the nasal cavity. The nasal cavity also has different cavities within it, which is actually divided by a structure called as a concave. It is usually lined by mucous membranes, and why are these membranes essential is that it helps to trap any kind of foreign particles in the air that has been inhaled from entering into the lungs. Likewise, it also warms the incoming air, that is, humidifies the air so that the airway system doesn't get dry. And because of this, the different particles which are usually inhaled from our environment in the flow of the air, they are actually swallowed into the stomach when they are transported through the pharynx through the help of the nasal cavity. So in this way, this structure works. Likewise, the other structure is that of the sinus. There are typically four sinuses in every human, and that is maxillary, frontal, ethmoid, and sphenoid. So in this picture, we can see that this is the frontal sinus. The frontal sinus is here, that is in between the two brows, two eyebrows. Yeah, this bluish structure. Now next is the ethmoid sinus. Ethmoid sinus lies on the lateral aspect of the nasal bone. This is the nasal bone, and on either side we can see that we have got the ethmoid sinus. Likewise, the maxillary sinus is actually present in the maxillary bone, and this supreme area is the maxillary sinus, which is present on the lateral aspect of the nose above our mouth. And along with that, we can see that nearby our ear we have got another sinus, that is the sphenoid sinus, and the sphenoid sinus is present nearby our ear. So in this way, different sinuses are present in our body, on our face, and these are actually the air-filled cavities which helps to reduce the weight of the skull. Now next structure is the pharynx. Pharynx is also one of the most important structure in the airway, especially because it is a common ground for both food and air, meaning that both food and air has to pass through this structure in order to reach the respective destination. For instance, it is a funnel-shaped structure which is also called as throat. It lies posterior to nasal cavity, so it extends from the nasal cavity to our larynx. Means posterior to nasal cavity is the nasopharynx, posterior to the oral cavity is the oropharynx, and posterior to the larynx is the laryngopharynx, or also called as the hypopharynx. So in this way, the pharynx is located posteriorly to different structures of the airway. Likewise, nasopharynx is the uppermost, oropharynx lies in between the nasopharynx and hypopharynx or laryngopharynx, and hypopharynx lies in the lowermost part of the pharynx. Now going on towards the larynx, which is the part of the lower respiratory tract. Within the lower respiratory tract as well, we have got four structures. One is larynx, then comes the trachea, and then the bronchial tree, and finally the lungs or alveoli. Now first of all, let's go towards the larynx. Larynx is actually positioned superior to trachea and inferior to pharynx, meaning that it lies below the pharynx but above the trachea. Here in the picture we can clearly see larynx lies in between the pharynx and trachea. So above the larynx we have got this area known as the pharynx, and below the larynx we have got this area known as the trachea, and this is the esophagus actually. Yeah, in this way trachea actually lies in front of the esophagus. This is esophagus and trachea is actually present in front of the esophagus. Now it will come afterward, I will again explain it later on. Now let's only look at the larynx right now. Larynx is actually known as the vocal cords or the voice box of our body. I am speaking right now because of my vocal cords, and it also helps to prevent different particles into the respiratory tract. Wow, how does this larynx actually produce our voice, as well as how does it actually help to prevent the particles from into the respiratory tract? Let's discuss it further. So larynx has this structure called as the epiglottis. Epiglottis is actually a leaf-shaped structure or made up of the cartilage. Here in the picture we can see that this structure is the epiglottis. It is leaf-shaped as well as made up of the cartilage, and it acts as a flap. Flap meaning that it is the opening and closing. It helps to close the trachea or this airway tract whenever we are swallowing our food, so that the food does not enter into the airway tract but rather into the esophagus. So likewise the vocal cords, how do vocal cords work is that vocal cords is actually made up of two muscle folds, which is connected with a connective tissue and also covered with the mucous membranes. And as a whole, these connective tissues, muscle folds and the covered mucous membrane is what forms the vocal cord as a whole. However, we have got two types of vocal cords in our body. One is the false vocal cords and another is the true vocal cord. These both vocal cord work in alignment with one another to produce different pitch of sound. For instance, whenever we are producing high pitch voice, that is the shrill kind of the voice, then we have got higher tension in our vocal cords. However, if we want to produce loud voice, means we want to speak in loud voice, then the air force increases, which helps to increase the loudness of our voice as well in the vocal cord. Along with that, we can see that during the normal breathing, during the normal breathing we can see that the epiglottis and the vocal cords, both of the vocal cords are actually open. Because of this we can expel and inhale the air. Whereas whenever we are swallowing our food, in order to prevent the food from entering the airway tract, this area gets closed, meaning that both the epiglottis as well as the vocal cords help to close the area so that the food does not enter into our airway tract but rather into the esophagus. So as a total, in this figure we can see that in this green area is how the air flows inside as well as outside, right? So this inside and outside flow of the air is what produces our sound. In what structure? In the larynx structure. Okay, now let's go towards further detail in the lower respiratory system. Especially trachea, bronchi and alveoli are primary structures which are responsible for, which are very, very important in order to maintain our gaseous exchange and processes. The trachea is actually located anterior to esophagus, and that extends from 6th cricoid ring to right and left bronchi, carina T5. So what does this mean? Actually is that in this figure we can see that this area is the larynx. It looks like a bony prominence, whereas trachea is one of the conducting cylindrical shaped structure that extends from the cricoid ring. Which cricoid ring? 6th cricoid ring to the right and left bronchi, meaning that it extends from the 6th cricoid ring here to the bifurcation of the trachea into left and then right bronchi. In this way it gets divided. So here we can see that the trachea has numerous structures which are circular in shape, but these are actually incomplete, right? And another thing is that these are horseshoe shaped and they are made up of cartilage. So behind the trachea on the posterior side, here we have got the esophagus. So what happens is that the trachea is actually made up of the cartilage that are incomplete. Why they are incomplete? Because posterior to trachea we have got esophagus, and esophagus we have got different food particles that needs to move down, swallowed through the wave-like motion into the stomach. So that's why in order to provide sufficient space to the food to move inside the esophagus, for the food particles which could be larger or smaller, the trachea has got incomplete cartilaginous structures in them, right? And the cartilage also helps to support the structure that is the trachea. So in this way, trachea structure can be explained, and further it can be seen that it is actually lined with pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium. We need to understand that what these airway tracts are lined with in order to better have knowledge and information on what kind of secretions can be expected from different parts of the airway tract. Likewise, they are also lined with the goblet cells. And the cartilaginous rings, horseshoe-shaped structures that I have discussed before, they are 20 in number. And these rings are incomplete, right? Now, another structure that is present in carina especially is carina. In the trachea especially is carina, and carina is this structure. Means that the area from where the trachea bifurcates is known as carina, right? So we have got carina here, and this is the area from where the trachea has bifurcated. Means this is the area of carina as well. Now next is that the carina area is very, very sensitive to any kind of irritant. It has got very sensitive mucosa. Because of this, the cough reflex is comparatively higher as compared to other structures in the respiratory tract. Now next, we can see that we have got bronchi. So this is the airway tract. Then it bifurcates. What bifurcates? The airway tract, especially the trachea area of the lower respiratory system bifurcates. And when it bifurcates into the two areas, like right and the left lung, then it is now known as the bronchi. Yeah, and these are the first bifurcation is known as the main bronchus. Then further it goes along with as they go down, they further divide into large number of branches like structures, and we can see that the bronchi that has been bifurcated into the right side and the left side are quite different to one another. For instance, this right side bronchi is very short, and it is also very wide, and it is more vertical, right? But in the left side we can see that it is very narrow and it's very long as well, and it is less vertical than that of the right. Because of this particular reason, there is higher chance of aspirating the food particles into the right side of the bronchi rather than the left side. So now each bronchi divide. Now that the trachea has bifurcated into two left and the right bronchus, they again divide into the bronchi known as the secondary lobar bronchi. The right bronchus divides into 3 secondary lobar bronchi, whereas the left bronchi or bronchus divides into secondary lobar bronchi that are 2 in numbers, right? Now next is that this secondary lobar bronchi again divides into tertiary segmental bronchi, which again divides into the terminally bronchial and finally into the respiratory bronchial. This respiratory bronchial finally opens into the alveolar duct that can be seen in this figure. This is the respiratory bronchial which has opened into the alveolar duct, which is connected with the alveolar sac. In this way, the bronchi is connected with our alveolar sac. Now next is that we need to understand that what kind of lining or membrane is present in these different structures of bronchi. First of all of the bronchi actually have columnar epithelium which are ciliated and pseudostratified. These are ciliated because they help to trap different foreign particles within them and prevent them from entering the alveoli. Whereas the terminal bronchioles, which are present at the end of the bronchial tree, are non-ciliated. And the respiratory bronchioles actually have cuboidal cells in them. meaning that these cells act as a immunity response to any foreign particles, and the alveoli is lined by the squamous cells, right? And in this way, the secretions and their functions differ from one another. So now comes the alveoli. Alveoli lies at the end of the respiratory tract, and they are present in the saccular forms. Saccular forms meaning that they are interconnected with one another, and in one sac we can find about more than 17 alveoli, and they form a sac-like structure in this way, and they actually are connected to the bronchi like this, right? This is the bronchi, and this bronchi connects with the alveolar duct, and that alveolar duct again connects with the alveolar sac. One of the most interesting thing about alveoli is that they have actually cells known as the pneumocytes, which are responsible for production of a substance called as a surfactant, and the surfactant help to prevent the collapse of the alveoli, meaning that the alveoli always contract and expand as per the airflow inside the alveolar sac. So whenever they are expanding and contracting, there is also the risk of contacting with their own walls, and when they are contacting with their own walls, there is higher chance that they might collapse. So in order to prevent this collapse, they are lined with a substance called as a surfactant, which are produced by the cells pneumocytes present in the alveoli. So next thing is that alveoli are primarily responsible for the gaseous exchange, which is most important in our body. So here in detail we can see that alveoli is actually lined with large number of capillaries. These capillaries are responsible for bringing in the carbon dioxide into the alveolar area, meaning that if we have got an alveoli in this structure and the capillary membrane here, yeah, then it is lined with the capillary membrane. This is capillary membrane, also known as the endothelium, and this is lined with the alveolar membrane, also known as the alveolar epithelium, right? Now in between them we have got very thin basement membrane, right? Now we commonly have the knowledge that the alveoli has got higher amount of O2 in them. Their O2 level is very high, whereas the carbon dioxide content in the blood is very high. So what happens is that through the basement membrane, when the concentration of oxygen is very high in the alveolar sac and very low in the blood vessels or the blood, then the higher concentration oxygen goes towards the lower concentration. For instance, here the oxygen is high in the alveoli, means the higher concentration goes to the lower concentration, that is in the blood vessels. Likewise, we can see that the CO2 is high in the blood, so now it will go towards the lower level, which is within the alveoli. In this way, the carbon dioxide and oxygen both are exchanged. So in this way, we can see that the alveoli is very extremely connected with the blood capillaries, right? So with the help of the basement membrane, they usually help to exchange carbon dioxide plus oxygen with one another based on their concentration. Yeah, in the alveoli we have got higher amount of oxygen. Why? Because we have just inhaled the air. But in the blood we have got higher amount of carbon dioxide. So what happens is that the blood takes the oxygen with them, and inside the alveoli comes the carbon dioxide. Then we exhale the carbon dioxide again outside, and in this way the complete breathing process is regulated time and again. Here we are only talking about the anatomy, so we will again in detail talk about this in the next video. Now in total here we can see that in summary of this structure, we can see that for the respiratory system to work, there are two types of tract, that is upper respiratory tract and the lower respiratory tract. Upper respiratory tract has nostril, means nose, from where we inhale. Then it comes to the nasal cavity. These are all lined with different mucous membranes which helps to trap the foreign particles in them, as well as help to actually form different kind of humidification processes in order to prevent from drying of the air. Likewise, it then transmits to the pharynx. The pharynx is the funnel substructure, and it acts as a common point for both the food as well as the airway. Then it reaches our larynx. Larynx is known as the voice box of our body. Then it passes through our trachea, that is a cylindrical structure, and finally it bifurcates into the bronchi, and bronchi also branches off into different numerous minute structures, which further passes the air into the alveolar sac, and in this way the air finally reaches into the alveoli. And since the alveoli is lined with large number of numerous capillaries, it helps to exchange the oxygen and carbon dioxide with one another, and this is how the oxygen is exchanged at the cellular level. So I really hope that this was very helpful for all of you guys. See you next time. Thank you.